So we should appoint everybody that's not here in some sort of committee,
A really bad one. Let's come up with a
especially
really
those
bad
in the Caribbean.
Sinister thinking.
Really should be a construction oversight committee that has to hang out at the treatment plant.
Rob, on the remote line, we have a quorum. So we will call this meeting of the Water and Sewer Authority to order and start through the agenda with unfinished business. So you've got minutes from March 17th, 2022.
Move to approve.
Got a second? Got a second? Any discussion to that? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Okay, motion carried. All right, we also just point of business, we do obviously have some missing members. Jeff, Bob, and Lynn are both absent, and so Jim is on his way. There he is. So Jim's joined us. Good deal. All right, we have a public hearing. It's the next item regarding the proposed fiscal year 22-23 budget. Mr. Wilson, you got anything to offer additional to that, or just open the hearing?
I'll just open the hearing, and if there's any discussion afterwards, I'll be glad to discuss the budget.
Okay, all right. We will open the public hearing on the 22-23 budget and see if there's anybody who'd like to speak to this issue. Hearing none, we will close the public hearing. And we'll enter into a work session if necessary. Is there any more discussion on the 2022-23 budget that was presented at the last meeting?
We're gonna talk about the compensation study in just a minute. Has that been, the recommendations, has that been incorporated into the budget now? Or did you have enough leeway in there? They don't need to be?
Well, we included a 7% pool of money, which will come out of that if the board approves moving forward.
Okay.
Recommendation.
Any other questions or discussion, comments about the proposed budget? Okay, here now we'll move to the next agenda item, which is adoption of said budget. Fiscal year 22-23, there's a budget ordinance and approval of the capital improvement program. Do I hear a motion to approve?
I would make a motion to approve the budget ordinance and approval of capital improvement program.
Got a motion on the floor. Is there a second?
Second.
All right, got a second. Any discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All right. Motion carries. All right, we'll roll into new business. First is implementation of compensation study, market pricing and analysis. More going to lead us through that.
Mr. Chairman, Board, thank you very much. I have with me tonight Becky Droz. She's going to be talking about the compensation study. We've been working on this for several months. Becky is the lead person on our last study that we did in 2019. And we really changed our whole compensation package at that time, pay schedule, job grades, et cetera. So she has gone back through this study and looked at the same thing. We've looked at job descriptions, classifications, pay scale as well. So I'm going to turn it over to Becky to let her go through that process and give you the information on the study.
Welcome, Becky.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to see you all again. Some of you may remember me from last time, although I will say we were under the name the Employers Association. We went through our merger last year with CAI, or Capital Associated Industries, out of Raleigh. So our association is now even bigger. But I'm using the same methodology and same resources that were used in the past. So glad to be here to share the results of that compensation study. The next slide, please. All right. So this year, what I did is I looked at job descriptions for 55 different titles. That represents 57 different employees. With those different positions, I'm actually looking at the really the meat of the job descriptions. What are people actually doing, not just what are people called? Once I have those descriptions, then I go out and I look at 3 different sources for market data. So the first one is the Catapult North Carolina Wage and Salary Survey. Historically, we did this as TEA with CAI, so it's the similar resource to what we would have used a few years ago. That gives us good local information for the positions. I also use a resource called Economic Research Institute, as well as Comp Analyst. Economic Research Institute and Comp Analyst are robust survey sources. These are all employer reported data. And so that makes sure that we're looking again to match based on responsibilities and skills and not just on titles. When I look at that information in the different survey sources, once I've got a match based on responsibilities, then I'm looking at the scope. Who are we competing against? Where are we losing people? Where are we hiring from? And so I'm looking at the Charlotte metro area. I'm looking at the government industry, water and sewer and other systems, and for some positions, looking at all industries as well. Because if you think about some of those transferable skill sets, you are not competing just against other water and sewer, even other municipalities, you're competing against a bigger industry group. When I look at that data, you'll see in surveys, sometimes you see an average or a weighted average, as well as median or 50th percentile. I use the median or the 50th percentile in compensation work because that represents the middle. So half of salaries reported are above and half are below. That means that we're not influenced by any outliers. If any employers reported anything especially high or low, it's not going to skew that data. So I pull that information together. If it's 2 sources, if it's 3 sources, however many sources have a good match based on that skill set, I bring them all together into a simple average, and that gives us what I would call the market average. That represents the going rate, and that information gives equal gives equal weight to every source that's included. Oh, perfect. All right, so based off of that data, I do have a couple of different recommendations. So the first one is that building on the work that we did a couple of years ago when we revamped the whole compensation structure, I would like to keep that structure in place, but I would like to make an adjustment to that structure overall. I would increase that structure by 3.1%. That's reflecting what we're seeing in the market as far as changes with the cost of labor. So what it takes to hire and retain somebody has increased by that 3.1%. So that's the adjustment to the actual structure itself. Once that is done, I would also recommend that you do an across the board 3.1% base pay increase. That will allow you to, again, look at thinking about how you retain employees once you've brought them in and trying to keep them current with the changes in the cost of labor. The cost to do that right now with the salaries as they are is approximately $119,000. By using that 3.1% for the structure adjustment, as well as giving all employees 3.1%, I would then say any additional dollars can be applied to a merit budget, where then you can start to differentiate based on performance. So if you have some top performers, you can spend those dollars to reward them for that performance, yet keep everybody current with what's happening in the market. The other piece of that with the market data and having those jobs assigned is that there are a couple of positions that I would recommend changing the grade assignments. That recommendation to change a couple of grade assignments is coming from that market data. The goal is to align the midpoint of the structure with the market. That says we're competitive, we're not overpaying, we're not underpaying. And for a few positions, the way the market has changed, there are a couple that I would change. The first one is the senior lab analyst. That one's gone up, so I'm recommending a one grade bump for that. The other is the Deputy Executive Director of Administration. Based on market data, I'm recommending 1 grade change. And then the other positions are the utility maintenance techs, 1, 2, and 3. They currently sit a grade below what we have with the mechanical electrical technicians. And I would recommend that those all get bumped 1 grade. And so then we'll have all of those maintenance technicians, the utility maintenance techs and the electrical mechanical folks on the same grade. And the market data supports that, in addition to the internal equity of thinking about what are those individual roles. My recommendation is to continue to do an annual review of the compensation equity internally. So that's looking to say, do you have people in the right places? You've got the structure in place, you've got those minimums, midpoints, and maximums. So each year really looking to say, do we still have people in the right place? Are there any adjustments that need to be made? I would also recommend continuing that every 3 years you do a full study and look at the market data to see how that has changed, to see if there are any other grades that need to change. Of course, if there's anything that comes up during the year that you're really feeling a lot of heartburn over, you're having a really hard time attracting or retaining people in a particular position, then reach out and we can look at those as needed. Of course, each year, even though you don't need to do a full study every year, each year I would look to see, do we need to make any changes to that structure? And in some situations, you may not need to, but every year we want to look at that and see what's happening with the trends in compensation and the cost of labor. Are there any questions?
Any questions for Becky or Robin?
I have a couple.
3.1% base pay increase, but what about the graded?
With the grade adjustments, you have a couple of options. And so one, when those folks move, they're still appropriate within the range. They're still within that minimum. We don't have people that are falling behind, but we can also say, because we have that bump, do we need to look at where they're placed? And that's what I would do. So you might say we've made that bump, but they're still properly placed, or you might say based on their performance, we do want to make some additional percentage. I think part of that merit budget could also help make any correction or make any adjustment for that based on that data.
Do we have anybody that's over the max in the range?
No.
Do we have anybody that's under the minimum of the range?
I think you might have a couple of cents, but there's nobody significantly low. And that's only because I'm recommending that change. If the 3.1% happens, then those folks will be low.
Okay.
Yeah, if they move together.
This may be a question for you, Mike, and it sort of builds on what Jonathan asked at the beginning about the budget and this. Is there anything else in the budget, like cost of living? I can't remember right offhand.
If you'll remember, I said we were gonna wait and see what the other jurisdictions did before we came back later in the year. So the actual ordinance says nothing right now about increases. I would come back. So after we do this, we'll come back with a recommendation on the merit range in May or June.
So what's being recommended here will be the minimum, and then you may bring back additional based on what the other. Okay. You said you budgeted 7%,
Right.
so enough to cover this plus potentially some.
Yeah, up to a 4, up to 1 to 4 merit or something.
All right, any other questions, comments?
I guess the comment is the grade assignment or possible change of the grade assignment, particularly if you're having any issues attracting people to those technician positions in particular. Those would be ones I assume we could look at, or you would look at pretty quickly. Okay. I think that was a big part of this, is one to make sure that we're staying competitive, so you can fill those positions.
Rob or Jim, did you guys want to, I thought I heard one of you had a question or comment.
I wanted to clarify that. So we're going to move all of our ranges 3.1% and do an across the board 3.1% as sort of a phase 1 thing here. Is
That would be my recommendation, yes.
And then Mike, you'll bring back the merit-based component after this. I mean, that sounds very consistent with what I think all of our other communities are seeing as far as making an adjustment to our ranges. Harrisburg's doing our salary study right now, and I hope to have that in about a month. And I will be very happy if it's only 3.1%. So I just want to clarify I was understanding it right. And so I'm good.
All right, any other questions, comments? Hey, hearing none, is there a motion to approve the implementation of the catapult compensation study market pricing and analysis effective May 1st, 2022?
So moved.
Second.
A motion and a second, any discussion? Okay, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. Thank you.
Thank you.
Next on the agenda is a request for approval of Shelley Ferris as our finance officer. Michael.
Due to our opening in our finance director's position, we need to have someone designated as our finance officer. Under the statutes, Shelley is our assistant finance director, and I'm just asking that the board appoint her as official finance officer until we hire a new finance director.
Is there a motion to that effect?
I'll make that motion.
Have a second?
Second.
Any discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, motion carries. All right, got a, next agenda is a capital project ordinance for the Lower Puddle Creek Aerial Interceptor budget. Michael.
Okay, the next two items are both related, or next three items, I should say, are both related to the ARPA money that's coming out. This is part of the $35 million that we were appropriated in the budget. And part of the regulations requires that we submit a capital project ordinance showing the amount of the ARPA monies budgeted and the total project cost. We had previously adopted a capital project ordinance for this project probably a year and a half ago as we started designing it. But just to meet their requirements and make the filing easier, I'm asking you to re-adopt it with the new amounts for this project. It's 35 million of ARPA money. Right now, we're planning on $1.8 million of system development fees and balancing out the remainder with new bonds sometime next year for a total of $44,867,550.
So these revenue fund proceeds don't exist yet.
And we're not awarding a contract with the construction. When we bid the project out this fall, we will come back and do a final project ordinance amendment based on whatever the bids are on the project.
Any questions on this project ordinance? Is there a motion to approve it?
I'd make that motion.
Second,
Second.
any discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, motion carries. All right, Michael, the next item, approval of the resolution accepting the ARP Act offer.
Right now, they also require, DEQ requires a resolution accepting the ARPA monies and outlining some of the who will do what and those kinds of things in the resolution. So asking for your approval of this resolution.
No move, Mr. Chairman.
Yes, motion on the floor. Is there a second?
Second.
Any discussion? All in favor, say
Quick
aye.
question, Mike.
Okay, yes, Rob.
And I don't know where to squeeze it in here, so I figured this would be a good enough point as any, but our system development charges, is that calculation taking into account like this 44 million and then the projected 100 million for Rocky River treatment plant?
When you remember, our system development fees were calculated 5 years ago on our proposed CIP at that time.
Okay.
So there may be different amounts in it. When we do update the policy or the system development fees at the end of this year, the 5-year period will be up. We'll have a statute to recalculate it. We will update what we spent and what we intend to spend on the next 10-year CIP when the new system development fees are calculated.
Okay. I appreciate that. And I appreciate you, you say not pandering to me, but indulging me because I wasn't here 5 years ago and I'm going to ask you lots of these questions as we go along.
Right. And of course, our CIP is much different than it was when we originally adopted it. So.
Right. Makes sense. I appreciate
Have a
it.
catch up in the actually calculation of the.
Good question. Good reminder for us too. All right. Is there any other questions or comments? Is there a motion to adopt this resolution?
I think we already had the motions in second. right?
Yes, we did. Thank
Didn't
you.
vote yet.
Thank you. All right, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right. Motion carries. All right, there's a conflict of interest policy related to this. Michael?
Right. The ERP funds require a series of policies be in place. William and I are working on about 5 or 6 more. It'll be coming at the next meeting, but this is a conflict of interest policy that's required. Each board member, all the staff, all required to sign the conflict of interest policy, acknowledging we've read it and understand the policy. So I'm asking that the board approve this conflict of interest policy.
Standard to me.
Yeah.
I didn't see anything unusual in it. Any questions about this? Anybody? All right. Is there a motion to approve the conflict of interest policy?
So moved.
We have a second?
Second.
I got a motion, and a second. Any further discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All right.
Any opposed? All right, motion carries. All right, we're moving on to approval of the bond order.
We previously approved one bond order that say we would have a public sale. What we've asked for now is a bond order that has a dual role or different dual purpose. We can either have the public sale or private placement. And that this is the new bond order that's attached that allows us to do that and designates that the chairman, myself, and the finance director will be the ones that make the final decision on which method we will use based on the most up-to-date information we have at that time. So I'm asking you to approve this bond order, and then I have some additional information I'd like to discuss after you approve the order.
One quick question, is there any scenario where we wouldn't choose the lower amount? Or is that a unlikely scenario?
I can't think of a reason we wouldn't pick the lowest overall interest rate.
Mitch might-
Just here, and he might know what.
No, so. Oh, I'm
That's okay, no
I'm so
problem.
sorry. I think the only scenario I can picture that happening is if the lowest scenario, well, I guess 2 scenarios. One is if the lowest scenario is the public sale, but it's close and you all, the designees, are more comfortable locking in the rate now as opposed to waiting what could be 2-3 weeks to get to the public sale. And there's interest rate risk involved in those 2-3 weeks. When you actually get to the time to do the public sale, rates could have moved and they could be higher at that point. So that's one scenario because rates aren't fixed. We don't know exactly what the lowest is going to be. I think the second is for LGC purposes, what they've told us is we have to pick what we want on their agenda. And we have to finalize that by Monday. So we have to tell the LGC by Monday for their meeting the following Tuesday, which way we want to go. We've been pushing hard on the bank approaches and trying to get those nailed down and answer as many questions as we can. We got hopefully a final term sheet from one bank this afternoon, right before we came in here, still waiting on another bank. So I guess there's a scenario where we get to Monday and we have to let the LGC know, and there are still lingering questions on the bank approach. Right now, I think you'll see, we'll talk about it, that it looks like the bank approach is the lowest option. But if we're not all collectively able to get comfortable that all the I's are dotted and the T's are crossed on the bank approach, do we want to risk telling the LGC approve the bank approach, not getting comfortable with that, and then having to push another month to go to another LGC meeting to get to the public sale? So again, I think Mike wants to talk a little bit about those considerations, but I guess those are the 2 scenarios where I could see it might not be worth taking the lowest bid because of just some uncertainties around.
And again, you as chair are going to be involved in those discussions and you have that experience. So
Yeah, just don't be mad at us if it steers us the wrong way. That's a joke.
I know. If you weren't giving me a hard time, I'd be concerned. hindsight's gonna be 2020. This is the last thing I'll say to that. Hindsight's gonna be 2020. We're gonna know in late May, when our public sale date comes up, did we make the right decision or not? That's just the way it works. So I think to Mike's point, we'll make the best decision we can at the time with those facts.
Since you're standing up, you want to explain this chart better than I can? Better than I can.
Sure.
You need to make it smaller, Thomas. You make it smaller. I don't think it needs either. There you go. That's good.
So maybe just like 30 seconds of background on this. We're doing a 25-year term financing here, which historically has always been a public, that's our option. If we want to lock in interest rate for 25 years, we go to the public markets. That's how it's done. We were in a situation with another client where we put out a flyer on a bank RFP for a 20-year term, and we just added a 25-year term to see if anybody was interested. We ended up getting a bid from Capital One for 25 years on that financing, which was pretty competitive with the public markets, which is when we brought up the option to Mike, do we want to pursue this to see if we can get any bank proposals for the 25-year term to evaluate that as an option. And one of the drivers behind that is, yes, if we can do better than the public markets, great. But the other piece of it is we're in a rising interest rate environment right now. And we have, we were looking at it earlier yesterday. This year, this calendar year, rates are up over 150 basis points, over 1.5%. Just over the last less than 10 days, rates are up 30 basis points, 0.3%. So we're in a pretty rapidly rising interest rate environment. Doesn't go up every day. Some days it comes down, but the general trend has been upwards. So the idea was, can we get to a yes from a bank or multiple banks to lock in a rate sooner than we could with the public markets at a competitive rate to the public markets? There may be some benefit to you all, or there may be some value to you all in getting that rate locked in sooner, not worrying about the interest rate risk over what could be another, at the time, 2 months, now maybe up to a month, a little over a month before we would be able to sell the public bonds. So that was the idea. That's why you all have several options in front of you. The column B is what we're calling the Capital One proposal. This is the initial proposal we got from Capital One, where they would do the financing all themselves. And they gave us an interest rate that was subject to what they refer to as an interest rate collar. So what they gave us a rate, they said, this is a good rate, locked in, as long as the 10-year treasury bond stays within 0.1% of where it is today when we made this bid. It has not stayed there. It has gone up. So we are working under that collar. We're outside of the collar. So we are floating with that 10-year treasury. As of Tuesday, the interest rate on this Capital One only option was a 3.76%. That rates are down about 4 basis points since then. So call that, it could have improved to about a 3.72, but can't tell what line number that is. But if you see down in the middle of the page, 3.76%, that's kind of the interest rate on that Capital One proposal. When we were doing the comparisons, it was very interesting to track this. Let me add this. The other thing Capital One has said is we cannot lock in the interest rate with them until we are ready to finalize a borrowing amount and a closing date and an amortization. So the big thing for us was getting the final bids, final GMP for the project, and locking in the Charlotte Water contribution to be able to lock in that interest rate. That's kind of what we've been working toward, or to be able to lock in the borrowing amount, which would allow us to lock in the interest rate. So that's one option, to go with Capital One. It was interesting to follow that some days it was up, some days it was down, some days it was better than the public sale, some days it was a lot worse than the public sale. It's a lot of moving parts. In conversations with Capital One, we shared what we were seeing and that we're not ready to make a decision and we're still working to finalize the borrowing amount. We had some discussions about other potential options, and Capital One came to us with this approach, what we're calling the two-bank approach. And what they've suggested is they can partner with another bank. We learned yesterday it's Webster Bank, who's the former Sterling Bank. I know several of y'all have done financings, Rob, Mike, with Sterling in the past. They merged with Webster Bank. So this two-bank approach would be a scenario where Webster Bank would finance the first 15 years. They have a better cost of capital over the first 15 years. Capital One would finance the amortization over the last 10 years. They have a better long-term cost of capital. And then we would blend those together and come up with what is the average interest rate. So looking on that same line that Mike pointed out, the short-term rate with Webster as of Tuesday would have been a 306. Perfect, thanks, Thomas. And then the long series would have been a 341, which blends down to about a 3.3% average rate, which is obviously better than that 3.76 with the Capital One alone. You can scroll over a little bit, Thomas. The other option here is the public sale, columns F through I. Unlike some of you all who already have credit ratings, and there's a little more certainty when we're getting ready to go to the capital markets, we can tell you pretty closely, City of Kannapolis is borrowing. We have a really good idea of what your public sale interest rate is going to be. Here, we do not have a credit rating established yet. We have met with all the credit rating agencies. We are scheduled to get confidential ratings next week from those rating agencies. Unfortunately, we have to let the LGC know on Monday, which is after we're going to have it, which is before we'll have those rates. So to provide perspective, what we've done is given you a range of potential outcomes for this public sale. Column F is on the higher end of where we think you might be rated, AA1, AA+, all the way over to column I, which is on the lower end, A1, A+. And so what you see is that would result in interest rates which would range from about on the high end of 377, essentially equal to the Capital One only proposal. On the low end, at a 351, so better than Capital One, but all of these scenarios, as of current markets, are still better or still higher than this two-bank approach with Capital One and Webster. So this public sale option is equal to or better than the single bank option, although again, you're still going to be floating with the markets until for about another month at this point. Or you could lock in Capital One by itself sooner, or hopefully we'll have the ability to lock in the two-bank approach sooner as well. Where are we at with that? Like I said earlier, today we've got a term sheet, what we think is the final term sheet from Capital One. We had a good discussion with Capital One and Webster this morning, and we're hopeful that we're going to get a term sheet from Webster, hopefully this evening, to review, which will give us time to work through those term sheets, ask any questions, hopefully get comfortable by Monday so that we can report to Flag and Mike that where we are, attorneys have reviewed term sheets, coordinated on documents. We feel comfortable with where we're at with the banks. And that's not a holdup in the decision. We're not quite there yet. We're getting there, and we're working hard to get there. So I think what we would hopefully get guidance from you all tonight, approve the bond order to keep all options open, bank and public markets, and then hopefully maybe give guidance to Mike and Chair on sort of an order of preference, right? I guess lowest if we can get it, if we're comfortable with it. If not, what's the order of priority or order of preference within these various options, I think is the idea for this evening. It's a lot of information. I know that, but there's a lot of moving parts here. Happy to answer any questions you have or dive into any more.
And if we go with a bond sale, our bond sale is scheduled for May 12th.
May 12th.
That's when we would lock in the rate if we go to the public market.
That's right.
So question for anybody that can answer it. The two bank approach, is that equally amortized over the 25 years? Or is that going to be, the first 15 years we're paying roughly 5 million, and then the last 10 years it would drop down to the 2.5 million or whatever that we're paying on the long series?
Sure. So we have solved in all of these scenarios, or there's a couple of years of interest only while you're under construction, but after that it's level annual payments every year. And so with the two bank approach, Capital One will have a minimal payment over the first 15 years, some nominal amount, just so they can say their loan's being amortized. And then Webster Bank is going to be basically there's only principal, the majority of the principal payments you're making for the first 15 years. After that, all of your payments will be to Capital One. Those will be sized. The payment schedules will be structured such that for you all, you will be paying the same amount every year from fiscal year 25 through fiscal year 2047. Your payment will not change. It's just a function of which bank you're paying what in each year. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, it's perfect.
Any other questions?
Last month, we adopted the service agreement with the idea we were doing a public sale. I assume that needs to be in play, whether it's private placement or public sale. We won't have to re-adopt that.
We talked to Scott, Leo, and William, please jump in here. My understanding is that the service agreement as adopted works for either a bank loan or a public sale.
That's right.
Does the bank seem to care about the agreement?
They care, yes, sir. I mean, it's a big part of the credit, but we've shared that with them. They've had time to look at it. Like I said, we had a good call with them this morning, and we're very clear about the priorities of needing to stay on track with this financing to keep the construction moving along. So, we've pushed them. The other maybe not item for consideration, but I think the good news is that the banks would be using Matt Davis as their bank counsel. Matt is also underwriters counsel. He's been working on the preliminary official statement, so he's very familiar. He's been on all the working group calls, and so he can help facilitate that with the banks as well. He's very familiar with the documents. So I think that's a positive in those conversations. Again, just want to get this term sheet, review it, give everybody a chance to get comfortable with where we're at before having to make the final decision.
I noticed the cost of issuance is the same for all the, is there some reason behind that?
We're still working, and I don't take that as gospel. We're still working to nail that down and gather all of that. The idea is we're basically done with the public sale at this point. I mean, the majority of the work is done for the public sale.
Can't go backwards.
Yeah, you can't undo that. At this point, we've already met with all the rating agencies that came down. I guess technically we don't have their rating. We could probably pull the plug and save some money. I think there'd still be some sort of charge from them. But at this point, we've gone so far. I think y'all have it'll give you all a lot of benefit knowing with certainty what your ratings would have been now.
It'll help us go into the.
And then as we go into the Cottle Creek financing, as we go into phase 2 of the wastewater treatment plant expansion, we'll have those 4 columns for the public sale become 1 column. It makes the conversation a lot easier. It gives you all a lot more comfort heading into that. So I think from our perspective, the idea was you've incurred fees for the public sale that are kind of some costs at this point. If we go the bank route, we're gonna have to pay those costs regardless, and we're getting a lot of benefit out of that work.
Got it. Okay. Any other questions for Mitch or for Michael?
So the motion would be to approve the bond order, which gives the flexibility, and that the executive director, the chairman, and the finance director would make the final decision as to which was the most appropriate between the two. Is that what I hear you saying?
Yes, sir.
So moved.
Second.
Motion on the floor in a second. Any other discussion? And the bond order does say that in there. I just read it. So, any other questions, comments, discussion? All right. All in favor, say aye. Any opposed? Okay, motion carries. Thank you, Mitch.
Yes, sir.
Okay, we'll move on to limited interim GMP number 3 for the treatment plant expansion.
All right,
Ed.
Chairman, members of the board, if my job is to spend the money, they get the money and we spend it in the engineering department. But we did receive GMP 3, the draft GMP 3 from Crowder a couple weeks ago. We're very happy to see that number was actually slightly less than the 30% estimate. So I believe we were around 78 million on the 30% design estimate, and this one was right around 77 million. So right there close together, under current market conditions is quite an achievement. We are still reviewing some of that. There's a few little small things to be worked out, but nothing major. We can feel very comfortable with that number being what it's going to be. I come to you with this, the thing we keep discussing and driving home is schedule. Okay, we all know that. We know the challenging environment that we're in. And Crowder came to us with several items, some that are kind of not surprises, some that are. Items such as 8, 10, and 12-inch ductile iron pipe. They're saying basically if you want it in December, you need to order it like last month almost. You know, you're looking 40+ week lead times to get ductile iron pipe, which is something I think you used to essentially go pick up. You know, it was not a considered significant lead time item. Some more electrical equipment that is looking at longer and longer lead times. We did get word here recently. We have some of the leadership from Crowder here, like our generators that we approved last fall. We're underway. They're moving, but they're slipping. Okay, it's a good thing we ordered them when we did. That if we had not, we would find ourselves in a tight spot there. So Crowder is taking very serious that challenge to keep those pinch points in front of us so we can make decisions to try to mitigate those and keep the project moving. We are asking for a limited interim GMP amount to be approved for a little over $13.5 million. I apologize for not including that amount in my memo amount, but it is in the request from Crowder directly behind that. Should be noted that is simply we're just approving part of the GMP 3 now. It's not additional money beyond GMP 3. We're just giving them the cover and the leeway to be able to go ahead and issue some POs to suppliers. We actually probably will not even be billed for any of that or a very small amount of that early. It's just giving them their corporate cover and that to be able to feel comfortable entering with those POs on our behalf. So it would be my recommendation to approve this interim GMP amount for $13,538,261 to Crowder Construction. And I do have an update coming later on this project and our status and where we're at and where we're going that I'll be giving later in the meeting. So does anybody have any questions with that? Crowder is here if we have any questions, not only about this right here, but about other things with the project. We do have one of their vice presidents and project manager here if you have any questions about the schedule and the project and how things are looking. It's a great time.
Questions for Chad or our partners at Crowder? I have one sort of related question. It's really the next agenda item, but I guess this 13 million is money we're going to get. We don't have it yet. Sort of, we're in the same boat as we mentioned the last one, or do we have enough cash reserves to
That's the
pay
reason.
these bills?
That's the reason we're going with this the way it is we would have enough if the bond sale was delayed to go ahead and fund this if we had to. That's why we're not bringing the whole GMP at this time, because we'll do that after the bond sale's approved and we know it's a done deal. But right now, we can fund this if we had to, and the bonds were delayed for some reason, so.
Just making sure.
Right.
Okay. All right, got it. Any questions on this limited interim GMP number 3? Okay, is there approval of such?
Make a motion to approve.
Is there a second?
Second that motion.
All right, I have a motion on the floor in a second. Approval of limited interim GMP number 3 for the treatment plant. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, motion carries. All right, we have to pay for it. There's a capital project ordinance for 13.5 million and change.
Move to approve, Mr. Chairman.
Second.
Got a motion and a second. Any discussion on the budget ordinance? Hearing none, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, motion carries. All right, moving on, Thomas, got award of engineering study from Withers Ravenel on Lake Howell.
Yes, sir. Mr. Chairman, members of the board have an opportunity to change gears for just a minute here. Talk about Lake Howell and the dredging and intake study that we're looking at out there. That reservoir out on Cottle Creek does include 2 raw water intakes. The city of Concord one is the one you can see from Highway 73 going across there. This proposal has to do with the intake that's near the upstream end of the lake near Highway 3. So that intake is situated near the upstream end of the reservoir, shallower depth overall up in that area. And so sediment can gather there more quickly and more intrusively than the downstream end down near 73 here. So in anticipation of resuming, raw water withdrawals from that intake in the future, Kannapolis staff, we've talked with them. They've expressed some concerns about impacts from silt around that intake structure and water quality in that area. So what the study would do is to compare the impacts of dredging in that area, that as an option for opening up the area around that intake and making that intake viable for the near future here, to potential intake modifications to move that intake farther out in the lake or to modify it even in place in some way to do that. So Withers Ravenel, we've talked with them. We've actually met with them out at the site along with Kannapolis staff. And we've got a proposal from them here that's included in your packet to study the contours of the lake in this area. So to look at silt deposition, look at the conditions right now, and evaluate the feasibility of removing that sediment, dredging that sediment out, or versus a modified intake configuration up there that might allow getting out beyond that area where sediment tends to be such an issue, and also potentially helping with some water quality issues up there as well. So we bring the study tonight. I'm here to answer any questions. Again, the study proposal is in the packet here, but it is our recommendation that we move forward with that intake study with Withers Ravenel.
Okay, any questions for Thomas?
Thomas, it looks like based on the specific scope that
Yes, sir.
the survey will extend north of NC3, because there is substantial deposition north of NC3.
Yes, I think they've got an area identified.
Just 800 feet north of
Right.
and 300 feet south of the intake.
Yes, and realizing that entire area, what's happening in that entire area is important to that intake. Right?
I would just worry that there's a lot of sediment north of NC3 that you just dredged at the intake. You're just gonna get
Sure.
more deposition coming from there.
Sure, and we want to see as part of this, what seems to be the most sustainable option over time. Of course, we can dredge in that area, but is that the best and most efficient use of everything to do that?
But they won't necessarily look at intake, relocation, or any of that kind of, is that maybe part of what their conclusion could say?
Yes, so they're looking at it's basically a conceptual study at this point. So they're looking at the sediment that's in the area, kind of quantifying that, saying these are our current conditions. And then to look at okay, we could remove that sediment, that's one option, or we could modify that intake. That intake could be modified somehow to get it out farther downstream into the lake. So kind of moving away from Highway 3 a little bit. What are the benefits of each there and seeing what that is?
And I think we see the long-term desire of Kannapolis is gonna need to use that more often. So we can get more out in the main channel a little bit further down. Maybe we spend, more money is spent now, but then we're not spending it every year or every 2 years trying to control sediment it does happen, like Jonathan talks about. You clean out an area, you get 1 or 2 big rain events and you just flush that area back full. So it's really trying to look at what's the best solution for 15, 20 years from now. Good, because it's going to be needed.
Yeah, good. Hey, any other questions for Thomas? Okay, is there a motion to award the engineering study to Withers Ravenel for the Lake Dante Howe dredging intake study?
I'll make that motion.
All right, second.
I'll second that
All
motion.
right, a motion and second on the floor. Any discussion? All right, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. All right, last business item, William and Michael, update on Midland.
Sure. So just as a little bit of background, board probably remembers at our March meeting, we did do a presentation at that time on the town of Midland's request to be added as a member jurisdiction of WSAC, and also the interim request is to have an ex officio non-voting member of the board. And so after that discussion at the March meeting, the board tasked Michael and myself to meet with the town manager, Doug Paris, to get an update from Midland where they stood in regards to the acquisition from Concord of sewer infrastructure, and then next steps about how this process would work to potentially add Midland as a member. So Michael and I had a good meeting with Doug Paris, April 12th here at WSAC. And the first order of business really was getting an update from Doug about where the acquisition stood. And he did provide good background there on their ongoing conversations with the City of Concord staff. They've also had conversations with the local government commission. This acquisition would be funded at least in part by debt. So that's why the LGC was involved. As part of that, since the LGC is involved, there are certain reports that the town of Midland would need to do in concert with the City of Concord. Those included a water loss study, an asset assessment, and a rate analysis. And so we understand from Doug that those are ongoing process in conjunction with the City of Concord. So that there are a few steps still need to be done, but Midland is doing the legwork right now to satisfy the local government commission. We also understand that, we had seen this $5 million budget line item, and that would be for a new sewer line along 24-27. That would not be directly related to this acquisition from the City of Concord. We also discussed a bit about Muddy Creek, which has been obviously a topic of conversation over the years. We know about the potential for an expansion from 300,000 gallons a day to 1 million gallons a day. Doug did share that, the town does have a lobbyist in Raleigh, and they would be willing to talk to their lobbyist about a potential earmark for WSAC to fund that expansion. And the conversation we had was that we're not, as WSAC or the board is not pushing for that, but if the town of Midland wanted to use their lobbyists to have those conversations about a potential earmark to fund that expansion, that would be something that WSAC would support. And that's consistent with what we have right now, which is a acceleration policy, where if a municipality wants to do something that's going to benefit them, WSAC is supportive of that. They're going to have to fund that themselves. So that would be a potential option. So anyway, that's would be ongoing. That would really involve the town of Midland, but it would eventually involve us to the extent there is an earmark. The second thing, just after we got this update from Doug, is talking about steps going forward. As you might remember from the last board meeting, we went through a pretty detailed series of all the steps that have to be taken, and from Midland doing a resolution requesting a joinder, all the way to WSAC needing a resolution consenting to that joinder, amending WSAC's articles of incorporation and bylaws, and then a public hearing followed by each member jurisdiction needing to adopt a resolution consenting to the joinder. And one of the things that the town of Midland is proposing is, could there potentially be a local act, a local bill option here to instead of going through those statutorily required steps, could there be an option to have a local act to avoid taking those steps, or to at least a partial route around that? And the question really was to this board is that, and Michael and I, and we shared this with Doug, is that wouldn't necessarily be something that WSAC would request. We wouldn't think that necessarily appropriate for WSAC to make that request. If the town of Midland wanted to consider making a request like that and putting what that proposal would look like, we would obviously be happy to take a look at that. And so I tend to think that the idea would be that we would not draft that, but that the town of Midland could consider drafting a local act or bill that they would then share with WSAC for our consideration, this board's consideration, as to whether that'd be something we would support. We're not even sure what that would look like at this point. This is kind of more hypothetical conversations. There's constitutional considerations about changing statutory law to do these things. But our thought was really that would be something that the town of Midland would consider and do the legwork on. It wouldn't necessarily be appropriate for WSAC to do that. The third item that we talked about was this idea of board representation in the interim. We'd shared with this board at the last meeting that there's not really an option under your current bylaws to have an ex officio non-voting member of this board. Every member of this board is required to vote unless there is a conflict of interest. And we just don't see a way around that. We did have conversations with Doug about what it may look like if, without going through the step of amending the articles or amending the bylaws, if one of the non-existing seats, and it really would have to be one of the 3 county seats, if one of those would be potentially earmarked for Midland. As you might recall, the articles of incorporation for WSAC set the members. And the way the county is set up is there's 2 that are appointed by the county commissioners to represent the county. The county commissioners also have a 3rd seat that is to be chosen with the advice of the other members. And so if that was ever to be considered, that's really a consideration for the county, not for WSAC. As you guys know, we don't appoint our own board. Our members appoint representatives, and you guys have all been appointed by your city councils or by the county commissioners. So that's not really a WSAC consideration. That would be a topic that Midland would need to have a conversation with the county commissioners. And so we kind of shared that, and I think everybody kind of understands how that would work. That's WSAC does not, we don't have a nominating committee. We're not choosing our own members. Our members are appointed representatives. So that's kind of just a broad picture. I know I spoke pretty quick here, but we did, very good, productive conversation. It was nice of Doug to come over here and sat in this room, and we went through various options. And so I think at this point that there's not particularly much for this board to do. I think we would go back, if you guys are so inclined, and tell Midland that it'd be fine if you want to consider doing a local act. And if you can figure out how that would work, we can bring it back to this board at a later board meeting. And you guys could weigh in at that time. That's something, obviously, we're going to our local delegation quite a bit these days related to the expansion and other things. So this would just be one more request. I think everybody gets that. But that said, I think if the town wants to do that request, and it comes to us and it makes sense, then that could be something that you guys could choose to support if you were inclined. And then the other thing was just making sure you guys are okay with the idea of if they go to their own lobbyists to talk about funding for a potential Muddy Creek expansion, to expedite when that would happen.
Other thing we did discuss was whether Midland would be interested in acquiring the system from Concord if they did not become a member. And they do not. They sole reason is to be a member of WSAC. So we discussed as part of the purchase contract with Concord that be contingent upon membership into WSAC.
That's right. Yeah. So that was kind of like the chicken and the egg conversation we had at the last March meeting, where our thought was that Midland probably would not want to proceed with that acquisition without assurances they're going to be a member of WSAC. And so I think that is the case. And so what we talked about is, because especially if there's no local act and you have to go through this multi-step resolution process, we just have no assurances of when that would happen. We know that'd be a multi-month process to get on everybody's agenda and get that voted upon. And so in our opinion, this would ultimately be Midland's decision along with the city of Concord. But it made the most sense for them to line up their acquisition where everything's agreed upon, but then that becomes contingent on this event of them becoming a member. That is an easier point for them to control in the resolution process.
William, help me understand the third seat that the county has. That is to be appointed by the county based upon the advice of the member jurisdictions.
That's right. I'm pulling the exact language so I can just read it to you.
Okay.
Verbatim.
While you're doing that, I'm curious, does that mean that decision would have to go all the way back to our existing city councils or county commission to get that advice? Or does that mean based upon the members who are seated who represents that jurisdiction, is that who makes the decision? Is it the people who are sitting here who make that decision? Or is it explained? Is it at all?
No, it's not explained at all. I mean, the language literally says one appointed by the Board of Commissioners for Cabarrus County, North Carolina, with the advice of the other organizing political subdivisions. And there's no specificity given to what advice would mean.
So what happens if there's a difference of opinion on advice? I mean, is that a majority vote, or is it one person's advice not to do it decides the
I really think,
decision?
I mean, the way we've always treated this is that would be the county commissioner's decision. We haven't looked beyond that, as you guys have been on here and we've had replacements over time for certain representatives. We've always gone by who is appointed by that organization and never really looked behind there. It's not really necessarily our call, WSAC's call. I think this would be, I'm not sure, to answer your question, I'm not sure how the county commissioners in the past have determined what that advice means.
I'm not sure they've asked the advice, but Jonathan may can.
I don't know. So that's the position Bob Ritchie's in. And so he's been appointed, what is he, 10 years now?
Yeah, probably. Yeah, he's the third most tenured.
Yeah. So if you recall, Bob he had been serving as an elected member of the Soil and Water Conservation Board. And the idea was that they were looking at a position, and I believe the commissioners at the time discussed this with others, but they're looking at someone with a kind of conservation viewpoint. maybe the null or no development viewpoint, or although Bob has certainly taken a much more global view than that. But I don't know how they solicited that advice at that time.
I think the
So it would be
key,
for them to determine what that phrase means to them.
Yeah,
That-
that would be my read of it, yes. And we were obviously happy to have that conversation with the county, you know, if they want us to be involved in what that means.
Rob or Jim, did you have a comment?
I did. I was just gonna say, it says advise, not consent. And so we can advise, the member jurisdictions can advise the commissioners all we want. But ultimately, we don't have to consent to the appointment that they choose, is how I would read that. But, you all have been around longer and are smarter than I am. So that's, we'll just take whatever they've done in the past is how it would work. But I had another question if we're good with that one, because I think I have a more structural concern about debt and whether or not Midland understands and whether I understand how that would be associated. So the fixed share costs, Mike, like we looked at the budget tonight, we've got, $7 million of fixed share cost budgeted out to the communities. How is that billed out? Is that proportionally on the usage from the previous year? And if so, would Midland then assume that as well?
Rob, it's based on the 5-year average that we use for most things. I would assume that they would take over their percentage of flow that Concord currently pays. So they would pay that fixed part that Concord currently pays. It would be a small amount, but it would still be.
Not too small.
Not with $150 million of debt looking down the road at it.
That's true.
Well,
And just for background too, one of the things for commentary, we were told that the current population of Midland is 4,715. But they think based upon permits that, the future population will be around 9,000. So they're looking at potentially doubling population, just as a data point for everybody.
So is it based upon the amount of the system that flows that they're taking over? Or is it talked about population? I mean, if Concord
No,
sells
it's
them,
just the latter or the former in your case, yeah.
so if Concord sells them 1 million gallons of flow in that portion that they're selling them, then it's based on that 1 million gallons as a part of it, all the total flow that we're looking at. Is that right?
That's right. And so one of the things too, that's, there will definitely obviously need to be ongoing conversations with City of Concord and Midland, because this also, as a parallel track, would affect the allocation. And so right now, Midland, if they became a member, they're not a party to the interlocal agreement on allocation. And so that would be a conversation that the City of Concord would have to have with Midland, because City of Concord's 5-year average flows are including Midland. And so that would need to be figured out, well, what is Midland's percentage of the City of Concord's flow over that 5 years? So that everybody, I think, understands, that there's a lot of considerations here. Of it's not as simple as an acquisition and adding them as a member. Even above that is the interlocal agreement on allocation. They would need to be a party to the sewage service agreement. They would need to have their own pre-treatment agreement. And then we'd have to consider a multitude of other interlocal agreements that are out there and their potential inclusion.
Yes.
And Concord and Midland have an agreement now on the allocation. So we'd have to see how that worked out also.
That's right.
I think we're clearly talking about two different things. A board seat appointed by the county does nothing other than bring Midland to the table to be an official party to the discussions, but it doesn't deal with membership.
That's right. I think in their mind, that's probably a potential interim step of just of getting representation right now.
I just think that at some point, we're gonna have to bite the bullet and put together the financial side of this on paper that everybody can start discussing, because I think that's the elephant in the room is what is the cost to Midland to become a member here? And, you know, do we even talk about going backwards? We've all expended a lot of money to get us to this point. You could argue that some of their customers were Concord customers and they paid part of that, but those are the things we just have to work through and get on paper about what this looks like. Because we're in uncharted territory. We don't know what this looks like. So I think we just, at some point, before we get too much further, we're gonna have to figure out what all these things we just talked about mean to everybody and get it in paper and start to work through a proposal of what it really looks like. So I think everything else is just sort of window dressing, because that's really the bottom line. Midland has to know what it's going to cost them to become a member here. And we need to know the same thing to support another member of this organization. That's just my opinion.
No, I think that's right. I mean, I think they need to have that data and we do as well. I'm not sure, like, do we have enough that, like, that you could start doing some of that analysis, or do we not even have enough information yet to do that?
I think we'd have to get information from Concord. I know we know the Muddy Creek flow, but we don't know what parts of go to Rocky River. I don't believe, do we? And
We could work through water meter data and stuff, get real close on that, or do some temporary metering.
they have customers in both plants, so we have to.
Any other thoughts, questions, comments about this topic?
I know we I guess we didn't like the ex officio part, but I have been asked if we could kind of officially set up a liaison with them, someone that attends our meetings, and that we could work through all these difficult discussions and be the official person to gather and be the communications person, if the board would be willing to have an official liaison from Midland to be the person that carries the information back and forth. And it felt like that would be an important first step in our.
So can I ask a
Moving
clarifying
forward.
question? What would be the difference in
In a public.
it's an option right now of it's a public meeting?
I think, yeah, I mean, and we raised that too. Yeah, it's just, yeah, I mean, we said the same
Maybe I
thing.
don't
You're
understand
always
your
welcome to
question.
have a representative in the audience, and they've had from time to time, either a staff person or a member of their town council. I think this would be a designated person. And I think from WSAC's point of view, I think that makes sense as well to know that we're having conversations with one person, and presumably they're, if not speaking on behalf of the town of Midland, reporting back to their other town council members.
Wouldn't that be up to them to appoint
Yeah,
somebody?
That would be, yes, that would.
Yeah, I
we would
I don't have any
choose that.
problem with them appointing whoever they want for us to negotiate with.
I think that
Our choice.
recognize somebody as their official.
Well, in my opinion, that's their town manager or anybody that he currently would designate. That's the way the system works.
Does that mean that that person sits in on closed sessions?
No, you could always invite somebody to, but they would not have an automatic right at all to sit in a closed session. It really would not be. I mean, it's a bit of, but I do think it could be a good thing for this board and for the town to have a designated person that is involved in those conversations. Obviously, we'll continue to have conversations with the town manager as well. But I think this liaison was intended to be not a staff person, but a member of their town council. But that would be their choice.
Yeah, okay. All right.
That was not the name we heard last night.
Oh, okay. You heard another name for a liaison?
That's what,
Cassie.
yeah, it was
It's
Cassie.
just,
I mean, it was gonna be Cassie that was gonna do that job.
That's great. That would be good. You've obviously been at meetings in the past and have worked with the county and other folks. I think that'd be great.
but I guess the bottom line is, I think that's the town's responsibility. We're in the middle of negotiations or we're about to embark on them. We don't care, whoever it is, just tell us who it is. And then WSAC staff has already been delegated to do all this, so they do the same. And then
Yeah, that's fine.
That's the
I
same.
think just basically, yeah, someone from the town to tell us who that person is, and if it's Cassie, that's great.
I think that's what we should tell them. And just tell us who that is and we'll go from there. Anybody have any objection to that position? Anything else on this topic? Thank you, William. All right. All right, Chad, got an update for us?
Yes. A couple pictures.
Pictures of stuff we don't understand.
You'll get this. You'll get this stuff. We're not talking about blowers and all that stuff yet, so we won't get into it. So I want to give another quick update this month. Crowder now has 2 crews on site, working separately from each other, kind of headed opposite directions of each other. They've completed their setup of their office trailers, which seems weird to keep bringing up, but they've got quite the complex down there. So, it's quite a few trailers. Materials have continued to arrive on site. On-site utility locates are being performed almost daily in front of duct bank installations. As you can imagine, there is a lot of underground infrastructure in the way as they're moving along. So they've been being very careful and diligent, staying ahead of that. And the Crowder crews have been communicating, working real well with our staff. So all that's been going real smooth. Been a couple of things we've had to tweak around the plant, but communication has been really, really good so far. Click on. So there's just some site pictures here, duct bank going in. As you can see, there's a 5-inch conduit to kind of give you an idea of how big that duct bank installation is. And yes, that is pink reddish colored concrete to mark to stop digging if you hit it, to get people's attention. Go ahead. Again, just here's some more pictures of them continue to pour duct bank, and it's just a section where they've come up above ground. You can see down there in the bottom of the screen, there's the red didn't show up real great on there, but the kind of squiggly lines at the time this drawing was done is kind of the areas where they've been installed, and then kind of arrows showing the directions they're headed. I think they're both crews are about up towards the end of those arrows now. So been significant progress made so far coming away from the substations down there. For the next month, they're going to continue working on duct bank rebar tying. Utility locates are going to continue. Both Crowder crews are going to continue duct bank installations. Continue to work on pads for pad mounted electrical equipment, and Crowder plans, with the approval of our interim GMP amount earlier, to begin excavation of the new aeration basin site to start getting to that. There's an estimated about 15,000 cubic yards of rock that's going to have to be blasted and moved from that excavation. So the sooner you can get started and you can start tackling that, the better you are for your schedule. So that's going to allow them to get started on that excavation. With that, any questions?
Any questions?
I'll be back with more pictures next month.
Good deal. All right, open it up for public comments. Anybody here like to speak to the board?
I would like to mention that Chad and I have been negotiating with Charlotte Water on their participation. They initially came back, they had a third-party engineer review all the phases or GMPs of the project. They came back with initial participation of about 31 million. We had a lot of concerns about some of the things that they weren't participating in or the percentages they were participating in. We met with Charlotte Water and their third-party engineer, and Chad successfully argued some of our points and came back with about 39 million participation. So we gained about $8 million from that meeting. So
What's that percentage of the total?
they're going to fund, what was it, 38?
Yes, it's about 38 million.
38%.
But they get 60% of our flow?
40%.
40%.
So it really came down to some items that they thought they were making an argument that was kind of owner preferred type items. And our contract never really defined that they had to approve the way we expanded the plant, the way that plant needed to be, or our engineer designed it the way, and we approved the way it needed to be expanded. And then several of the items, the reason it's a little under 40 is some of this electrical work is repair and replacement. It's replacement of old infrastructure. At that, they participated, what, 26.47% instead of 40%. So that's the reason it's a little under 40. But we won the arguments on the other items and got that number.
Do y'all feel
And we
good
had-
about that number? Do you guys feel good about that number?
Yeah, very good about that.
We had originally estimated we were going to need to borrow about 77 million, and now we're looking at about 66. So
And part of that was we had assumed the GMP was potentially going to be, 5% higher than the 30% design. And with that coming in on budget and the higher amount from Charlotte Water.
Well, I think if Chad did that this time, he ought to repeat that once a month.
There's some other stuff I want you to negotiate too.
Negotiate compensation.
If you do this each month, I'm assure you there'll be some conversation adjustment.
All right, good update. Any other public comments? Okay, hearing none. Do I have a motion to go into closed session under GS 143-318.11A3 and A6?
So moved.
Second.
Got a motion, and a second. Any discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye. Can we
Any
take a
opposed?
5-minute break?
5-minute break. We'll be in closed session.
Miss Bass,
All right, any discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
We are adjourned. Thank you.